Have you ever watched a piece of media that made you say, damn, that was really good. I wish I had thought of that. Maybe it was a book, a graphic novel, a video game. See, this is the case with Elden Ring. Give me just a second and let me back up. Elden Ring is an upcoming video game by From Software. These are the same folks behind the wondrous Souls series, Sekiro, Bloodborne, a game that you know will ooze difficulty and scream atmosphere and style. In this video, we'll watch an Elden Ring trailer together, at least a small part of it. I'll sit back, and you should do the same. I want you to watch this. I want you to think. Think about how cool the story is. Think about what you can do with it. After watching it, I'm going to do a small breakdown of what I think, and most importantly, how those thoughts weave through adventure design, campaign design, how Elden Ring inspires me, how it lights a spark that can catch fire and bring something cool to the table. Let's go.
Every game by From Software starts with a cinematic trailer, and this is surely Elden Ring's.
It happened an age ago.
She's talking about the shattering of the Elden Ring. An entire age has passed since then.
But when I recall, I see it true.
This character, with 4 arms and this brittle, pale skin, was a witness.
On a night of wintry fog.
In a shot that's surely inspired by Lord of the Rings, 4 shrouded riders flee the scene. And if you played the network test, you might have even faced one of them. At night, on a bridge, this exact same shrouded horse and rider can be found and fought.
The rune of death was stolen.
But here is where things get interesting. So runes are letters of a runic alphabet, and in fantasy, they're often markings of great power. The Elden Ring is actually made up of runes. Its tiniest pieces are a currency, like souls, but its larger shards are called great runes, and they are far more significant. Together, these great runes of the Elden Ring spell out a golden order for the world. Japanese descriptions clarify that it's a golden law. It's a logic for life to follow. Now, this golden order is broken to its core, and it all began when the rune of death was stolen. So what specifically was the rune of death, and why was its theft important enough to spark the shattering? Well, I think items in the network test actually hold the clue. In Elden Ring, there's an item called a holy pot. It's something you can peg at undead enemies to prevent them from rising after death. It reads, "Incantations of the Golden Order, or Golden Law, have been stored inside. The Golden Law has no mercy for those who trespass beyond life's bounds." And its Japanese description clarifies that the Golden Law does not permit the logic to live in death. So with the rune of death stolen from the Elden Ring, nothing is keeping the dead in their graves anymore. That law doesn't bind undeath. Proof of this is in so much of the present game. Spirits are found all throughout the lands between, skeletons stand up from their graves. Even you, the Tarnished, you're called ye dead who yet live. In response to this lawless world, a group has even risen called the Golden Order Fundamentalists. They're people who try to enforce the old laws of the Elden Ring. One of their spells is Litany of Proper Death. It's an incantation that prevents undead enemies from coming back to life. So this golden law can still be applied, it's just not a universal truth anymore. While the Elden Ring was still whole and its laws were intact, the lands between were ruled by Queen Marika, the Eternal. Her being eternal suggests that the Elden Ring wasn't applying death to the Queen or her demigod children. Now that seems set to change, because the rune of death has been stolen.
And the demigods began to fall.
Surely it's no coincidence that only now death is being served to Marika's demigod children. A thief holds the rune of death, and it's being used.
Starting with Godwyn the Golden.
Wait. First things first. We must give credit where credit is due. Vati Vidya, Quality Content Weekly. This is the lore master for the Souls series of games. All of the games by From Software. This guy is the go-to, the guru. I recently discovered him. I have not, do not follow him on YouTube or anything like that, but I was piecing together his name, and I think what I did is, I know what I did. I kickstarted an upcoming Dark Souls concept art book, if you will, and I believe he is the individual behind it all. Sort of the, getting the ball rolling, so to speak. I don't know that, I know he's not the artist behind the art that's in the game, and maybe not the publisher, but whatever. I am supporting this individual, and you should do the same. Now, this guy's got nearly 2 million subscribers, so he doesn't need someone as lowly as me to plug his channel. But let's give credit where credit is due. That is where I found the Elden Ring story trailer that we just watched. Okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk briefly about the things that were in that trailer, and combining that with the information that's on the Wikipedia page, because admittedly, I don't know a whole lot about Elden Ring, or even many of the From Software games. I do have Bloodborne sitting there on PS4 in my cabinet. I have Dark Souls, and I have dabbled in them briefly. When I say briefly, I'm talking I played them for like 20 minutes. But let's just chew on this just a little. Where my mind is spinning based off of the trailer that we saw together. And then this right here. Elden Ring is an action role-playing game played in a third-person perspective, and it features elements similar to those found in its predecessors, the Souls series, as well as Bloodborne and Sekiro, Shadows Die Twice, with gameplay focusing on combat and exploration. What does that scream to me, and how might that translate to D&D? Focus your campaign, your adventure, on gameplay, combat, exploration. Combat's easy in 5th edition, right? Because there's a bunch of monsters out there, a couple of thousand, and you've got CR charts and challenge ratings and encounter builders and things like this, right? And it's the flashy, shiny stuff. You get to throw some cool big troll on the table, and you tell your PCs to roll initiative and so on. Exploration. I mean, look at that alone. Combat and exploration, those are 2 of the 3 pillars of D&D adventure, right? Combat, exploration, and social. So when you approach things with a little more of a video gamey thing, see, here's one thing that video games do so well, and I'm never going to say that you need to plug and play and take how something works in a video game and assume that it's going to work in the tabletop role-playing space, because we're talking about 2 different similar-ish forms of entertainment, right? Because you're geeking out, you're playing a game, but there's, of course, a different essence and vibe when you're sitting among 6 players at a table in real time, right? But I believe that we can definitely take a lot of cues, especially in the particular case, which is why I'm talking about this particular series and the games by From Software, a lot of cues from certain video games for pacing, for how to build that tension, for how to build that ambiance, that atmosphere, and so on, right? And the Souls games does that quite well. Now, whether you want to weave through the same level of difficulty that the Souls games or the From Software games provide, well, that's simply creating encounters in 5th edition D&D where everything is ramped up a notch, right? Every combat is potentially TPK worthy, okay? That's up to you to decide as a dungeon master. But what I think you can take from this, most importantly, is pacing. If you look back a year or 2 ago, many of my initial videos, I was just smashing the idea of pacing into the ground. I think other than making sure you have fun, and you can definitely look at the nuances and intricacies of making sure you chose the right system. Are you playing the right game? If your players want something dark fantasy, dark horror, maybe don't play in Eberron, right? Choosing the right fit for your table. But once you've chosen the campaign, the world, the setting, and the players have chosen characters and the appropriate edition of D&D, once you sit down to play, other than having fun, which is paramount, the second most important thing in all of D&D that you need to focus on as a dungeon master is pacing. And whether pacing means how fast do you level them up, how long do you play each session, when are you kind of wearing it a little thin? Like you should have called the session 2 hours ago because everyone is sleepy. How often do you have combats? When do you give a long rest? When do they go into a dungeon and into the tombs and into the cursed forest and it's fight, fight, fight oppressive versus sitting back in a tavern and drinking beer and having warm stew, right? Pacing. And the video games, not the video games and the From Software series of games, Dark Souls, Demon Souls, Bloodborne, Sekiro, and it seems to be Elden Ring, just have this pacing thing in spades, right? Because your interaction with a video game is you're sitting there with a controller or a mouse and keyboard. And if you played for 5 hours and nothing is happening for 50, 60, 70% of the time, right? If there's just not a lot going on, you're going to turn that game off. You're going to stop playing. There has to always be something going on. And don't mistake something going on for there always has to be action and, white knuckle combat where you're smashing the buttons. No, there just has to be something to do. You have an NPC to talk to, text on the screen to read, some chests to open up, and secrets and puzzles to work through, Elder Scrolls styled, how to unlock, pick those locks, and then combat, and then that sort of stuff, right? Maybe even a pause where you go to a different screen and you sort of update your character and you move your points around and attributes and role play it out, right? Pacing is everything. So I think when you can think of things through how would this work in a video game, you might be somewhat on the right page when you're creating adventures and campaigns as to how things are flowing, how things are moving from one stage to the next. All right. Director Hidetaka Miyazaki explained that players start with a linear opening, but will eventually progress to freely explore the lands between, including its 6 main areas as well as castles, fortresses, and catacombs scattered throughout the vast open world map. Just copy and paste just that. There are lands to freely explore, but on your little map, right? The map, I think too often we get caught into this glorious world map, right? But look at us even in real life. I mean, I'm in my late 40s. And there's many spaces on the world map, on the atlas, that I have not been to, cultures I have not seen. So how often are your level 1 characters that don't have access to teleport, a helm of teleportation? They don't have wizard NPCs just standing by to teleport them wherever they want to go. They don't have planar gates to move through. All they have is mounts at best, maybe just a donkey. So the scale and scope of your game is a little more like 20 miles. Go to the nearby town or village 10 miles away, get back to the city before nightfall, because that's when the monsters and evil things come out. That's as far as you're going. So instead of thinking about this massive open free world where there's so many kingdoms and cultures, how does that apply when your characters are level 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7? Yes, that stuff is worthy to have Craghammer and Whitestone and Iman and all these other critical role places or whatever they're called, right? But therein lies pacing. If you're waiting or you're trying to prompt to your players that you'll get to the good stuff, right? How often did World of Warcraft do that? Like all the best content's at endgame. So therefore you want to rush through the journey and get to level 80 or 100 or 120 as fast as possible because that's the only way you get to see the really cool dungeons, right? Why would you have your players, sort of admittedly say, hey, here's the open world. There's a lot of cool things in this town and this city and then this capital up there in the north. And here's where the king's stronghold is for the dwarven nation and all that stuff. But when you guys are able to travel the world in 4 or 5 levels, you'll get there. But what you've done is you've glossed over early gameplay. So look at something like this. Players will eventually progress to freely explore the lands between, including its 6 main areas. But start putting in the area your PCs will start in: castles, fortresses, catacombs. Interesting locales nearby, right? Because now you're dungeon delving, you're dungeon building. There's a lot of content there. I like how it says these main areas are interconnected through a central hub that players can access later in the game's progression. That could be like your gates, right? To travel across the world. Similar to the Firelink Shrine. If you know Firelink Shrine, if you know that from Dark Souls. And they will be explorable using the character's mount as the main mode of transport, although a fast travel system will be an available option. I like this. Throughout the game, players will encounter NPCs, obviously that happens in D&D, and enemies alike, including the demigods who rule each main area and will serve as the game's main bosses. I love stuff like that. You've got these 6 main areas, so create 6 little pockets, and each pocket is ruled over by sort of a sub-boss, right? Or a main boss. It gives this, yes, it can create sort of a segmented gameplay feeling, but it gives this depth and an automatic story arc within each region. Here's the cursed region of Nalroth, whatever that means, right? Here's the holy region of Dying Light. Okay, here's the sunken swamp of Guhet. And within Guhet, there's an entire ecosystem, right? There's their own culture, their own land, their own life, but then there's a sort of demigod, a main boss. And that boss is different than the main boss that's over there in the Holy Land. That's different of the boss that's in the Cursed Wood, and so on, right? So look through things like this. Video games that inspire you, but don't just sit there and sit back and say, oh, that's a cool game, I want to play that. Start weaving that stuff through your DM mind and use that to kind of inform the direction that you're going to go with your content as you're running it at the table, but more importantly, how you're going to prepare your worlds and when you might need to, what do they say? It isn't often what you put in that makes something really good. It's what you leave out. So this might be a good method of chunking through what is it that From Software does in their games? What does the Elden Ring trailer scream to you that seems to be doing it right from the get-go? And then what are the things in your world that you're about to run? And even if it's an established thing, and I know there's a whole book on Eberron and an entire chapter on the city of Sharn, but where can you sort of zoom in and narrow down that scope and focus? And I'm not talking purely just for the sake of building only one session at a time, but where can you zoom in and sort of video game it and ask yourself the question of, if my players were walking around, because that's exactly what they're doing. If my players were walking around in a video game, in this specific area of the world that I'm about to start the campaign or the session in, do they have buttons to push and something to do for the entire 5 hours, right? Because if you didn't in a video game, you're going to turn off that video game and you may never get to the great content later. That's one thing that shines, as I said over and over again, with video games is pacing is paramount just because of the method of interaction. But I think if you start thinking through that, but treat it as your 6 players at the table are 6 individual people with their own controller moving through your world. I believe if you, not all the time, but every once in a while, just sort of weave through this and think through that process in your mind, you will not only have a wealth of content to bring to your table and to prep, you'll just be a little bit cooler, a little bit better as a dungeon master. So there's my long tirade on Elden Ring and how I'm excited for it, but more importantly, how it has sparked some new thinking in regards to how I prep, plan, prepare, and run my D&D games. I'll try and get that Cuphead book, The Art of, done maybe today. Talk to you guys later.